Alright, what's going on everyone? Today we're going to be doing a first look at Nuxt UI, a UI library for modern web applications for Nuxt 3. Nuxt UI provides you with everything you can need when building out a Nuxt application, including 36 fully customizable components that are built using Tailwind CSS, access to over 100,000 icons from Iconify, dark mode support, and even access to a Figma design kit. So in this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to get up and running with Nuxt UI within your application. Now, before we jump in, if you are looking to improve your coding skills, then be sure to check out a platform that I've been working on called WebDevDaily. It's a free platform that offers daily design to code challenges to complete directly in an innovative VS Code-like browser IDE. Each day, a new Figma design is provided, putting you in the shoes of a professional developer so you can take your skills to the next level. In addition, as you improve your coding skills by completing these challenges, you'll also be building up a portfolio to showcase your work, and you can also learn from others completing the challenges. So if you're interested, be sure to click on the link down below in the description to sign up for your free account. Okay, so to get started, I'm going to assume that you already have a Nuxt 3 application. So what we're going to want to do is we'll open up our terminal, and then we're going to head over to the Nuxt documentation for the installation, and we're going to be using npm, so we'll just copy this snippet to install it. And then here inside of our terminal, we'll paste that in. Now, once that's installed, the next step is to add this as a module inside of our Nuxt config. So we'll just copy this modules array since we don't have one, since it's a new project. Otherwise, you just want to add the Nuxt UI to that array. And then here inside of our Nuxt config, we'll just paste in this modules array. And that's it. You can now use the Nuxt UI library inside of your Nuxt application. Now, one thing I want to mention is if you are installing Nuxt UI into an existing project, you're going to want to make sure that if you have the Nuxt Tailwind CSS module or the Nuxt Color Mode module, you're going to want to remove those from your dependencies since this module actually installs those for you. Now, since Nuxt UI installs the Nuxt Tailwind module, you can still do all the configuration as you normally would if you were just solely using the Nuxt Tailwind module. So, for example, we can say touch and we can create the tailwind.config.js right here. And then if you want to configure or create any custom classes, we can create a new folder, and this will be called assets. And then within this assets folder, we want to create another folder, and this will be called CSS. And then within this folder, we just want to create a new file, and this will be called tailwind.css. And within here, we just want to use the Tailwind directive to add the following of base, component, and utilities into our Tailwind application. And then if you wanted to add any custom classes, you can just say add layer, and then you can select which one you want to add a class to. Normally, you're probably going to opt to create utility classes, so you can say utilities, and then you can write your custom classes within here, and then you can use them within your Nuxt application. And also, since we created this Tailwind configuration file, we need to actually set it up. So if we come into this file, I'll just paste in the default configuration. And what I'll end up doing is I'll push this repo up to GitHub as sort of like a Nuxt UI starter kit. So if you want to head down below in the description, there should be a link to this repository. You can just head over and just copy and paste this in. Alright, so now that we have things set up, let's go ahead and take a look at how to use a component from Nuxt UI inside of our application. And we're going to be opting to use the button component. So here in the documentation, you can see to use it in the simplest form, you just want to use the component called uButton. And this is how all of the Nuxt UI components are prefixed by having u and then the name of the component. So here inside of the pages folder, I just have an index.view file. So inside of our template, let's just start off by actually declaring and displaying a button. So what we want to do is we'll say button like this, and then we'll add our closing tag. So we have two ways that we can actually display the content for this button. We can use the default slot by just passing some text. We can just say something like button like this, and then if we head back over to the browser, I have this open on localhost, you can see we have our default button. Now what we can also do if we don't want to actually pass a default slot, we can remove this and we can just have a self-closing button component, and then we can use what is called the label prop, and we can just say button label like this. So now if we head back over, you can see we're able to control the content by either using the default slot or the label prop. Now, by default, Nuxt UI comes with a pretty good amount of colors that you can choose from for your buttons and also other components within the library itself. So you can see here in the documentation, we have this color drop down. So you can see we have a pretty good amount of colors here, as well as a handful of different variants for the type of buttons that you can actually choose. So you can have an outline of one, you can do a soft. So there's quite a few different options. Now, by default, if you don't pass the color or the actual variant, it's going to be the color primary, which is this green, and the variant will be solid. So for example, if we wanted to change the color of our button, we can just say color, and then we can choose red, for example, and maybe for the variant, we want to say outline. So if we save this and we head over, as you can see now our button's going to be red, and we have, instead of it being solid, it is now an outline. So Nuxt UI also provides a size prop to go ahead and change the size of the button. So by default, if you don't pass this, the default is going to be set to small. And if we click on this drop down here within the documentation, you can see we have all these different options to choose from. So if we head back over to our app, what we want to do is we'll just say size, we'll say size like this, and we could just set this to be the largest, which is XL. And if we save that and we head back over to our application, you can see now we have a much larger button. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple more things that we can do with this button. So maybe, for example, you want to disable this. Well, we can do that with what is called the disabled prop, and we can just pass a disabled like this. Now, if you wanted to dynamically disable this based on a ref, what you can do is use a vbind on this prop, and then you can set it equal to whatever that ref is that you want to, set the true or false based on any type of, circumstance. So, but for this example, we can just use the disabled prop like this. So if we save that and we head over to our component or our application and we hover over this, as you can see when we do so, we have this nice little indication that it's disabled and we can't actually do any clicking. It has no hover effect. So that's really cool that Nuxt UI handles all that for us. Now, another nice feature that this component offers is a loading state. So we can add this by using the loading prop. Now, you can just do loading like this if you want the button to always be in a loading state. So if we head back over, you can see now we have it in a loading state. And if we wanted to do this dynamically, which is more than likely what you're going to be using this for, or how you'd use it, you can again do a vbind and set this equal to a ref. So for example, we can just come down here and say loading, and this can be a ref with the initial value of, we'll just do false like this, and then we'll say loading, and we'll set this equal to loading like this. And then what you would do is maybe, for example, you're making an API request, you would set this variable to be true, and then therefore it will start the loading animation. And once you're done with that request, you can set this to false, and then the button would go back to its default state. Now, I realize things are probably hard to see for the video, so I went ahead and changed the color and the variant back to the default values, but what I wanted to mention is how exactly is Nuxt UI getting this icon? So if we go back over to the documentation, how actually Nuxt UI is getting this icon is, as I mentioned earlier in the video, it is using what is called Iconify. And we'll be covering more about icons later in the video, but how this loading icon works is it's going to default to this set they have pre-installed for us called hero icons, and then it's going to use this icon of arrow path 20 solid. Now, you are able to set a global icon if you want to change this, and I'll talk more about global theming here in a moment, but I just want to show you how you can locally, for this one component, override that default loading icon. So here on Iconify, I went ahead and searched up this hero icon set, and we can really just select any icon that we want because the whole entire set of hero icon is available to us by default. So we can just copy this whole entire thing. And then if you look at the Nuxt documentation, we can use what is called the loading icon prop to set this locally in that one component. So if we head back over to the index.view file. So beneath our loading prop, let's go ahead and add our loading icon prop, and then we can paste that value in we have from Iconify. However, we do need to make a few adjustments. So how this works is we need to prefix it with I, and then we do a dash. And then we have the icon set, which is going to be hero icons, and we'll remove this colon, and then we do dash, and then you have the icon name. So if we save that, and we head back over to the application, you can see now that we have swapped out that loading icon for a new one. Okay, so another thing that this button can do is it can also be turned into a button link. So we can do this by passing it a to prop, and then we can pass it the URL that we want to go to. And we can also pass it a target prop as well, and we can do underscore blank like this if you want to send them to a new tab within that link. Now, another thing that's really cool about this is you can also pass it anything that you would normally pass a Nuxt link component. So say, for example, we had an about page, we can send them to /about. So if we create a new page here for that, and we'll just create something simple like this, and we want to make sure we save this file. And now if we head back over to the application and we click on this, actually it's still in a loading state, so we want to turn this to false like this. We can click on it because when it's in a loading state, it actually gets disabled. So now if we click on this, we should be taken to the about page within our Nuxt application. Okay, so we're not going to be covering all the features and props that this component has to offer. I mainly wanted to show you the basics of how to use a component and the general structure of how they work. For the most part, all the components are straightforward and easy to use. A recommendation for learning new components now that you have a general idea of how Nuxt UI constructs their components is to use the well-constructed documentation. So, for example, maybe you want to learn about using the input component, so you can select it here within the documentation, and they give you really good step-by-step directions of exactly how to use it and all the props that this component accepts. Now, when using the components from Nuxt UI, there may be times where you want to make a one-off change to one of the components, very similar to how we have with our loading icon, where we just change the icon for the specific button and not all of them globally. Now, to make these changes on a component, we have two options. We can either use what is called the UI prop or a class, and I'll show you both ways and I'll explain the differences and when you might want to use one or the other. So first off, we'll take a look at the UI props. So we'll do a colon for a vbind and we'll say UI, and then we'll set this equal to an empty object. And we're going to want to head over to the Nuxt UI documentation, and at the very bottom we have what is called the config, and this kind of gives us all the configuration for how this button is actually styled. And I definitely encourage you to go through this configuration to kind of understand how everything is set up. So for example, in the documentation, they talk about how we can change the roundness of our button. So maybe we want this button in this situation to be a little bit more rounded. So what we can do is we can target this rounded property in this object, and we can change the class from Tailwind. So if we head back over, what we can do is we can target rounded like this, or is it round? Let's see, it is rounded. And then what we want to do is pass the class that we want to then have instead of rounded medium. So we'll say maybe rounded, we'll do full like this. And if we save that and head back over to the application, as you can see now, our button is going to be rounded full. And under the hood, Nuxt UI actually uses what is called Tailwind merge. So how it works is when we target this rounded property and we add our new class of rounded full, it's going to see that we have a conflicting class since we already specified rounded medium as our default value. So it's going to resolve that conflict, and then it's going to apply the rounded full. Now, there may be a time where you want to do a reset on a specific property for a specific component. So if we take a look at the documentation for this button, we have this base property which has all these different classes. And maybe we wanted to remove all these for, any specific reason. So how we can do that is we can specify a property in this object called strategy. And we can set the value of this property strategy to a string, and we can call this override. And we just want to pass a comma here. So what this does is instead of using Tailwind merge to resolve any conflicting classes that we may define when we target a specific property like this, it's actually going to override that property completely with whatever we define. Now with this strategy set to override when we define our rounded property, this really technically isn't going to be any different than if we didn't define the strategy property to override at all. However, things change when we target that base property that we mentioned and we set this equal to an empty string. So now we want to do a complete reset on that base property, and we want to remove all those classes. So if we hit save, it's going to remove all those. And I added this disabled prop back onto our button. So if we take a look, as you can see, the base property does control some of the classes for when the component is disabled. So now if we head back over to our application, you can see even though our button is disabled, it's actually not going to provide those classes because we did a reset on that base property for the CSS. Now, the second way that we can change the appearance of a specific component is by just using the class. So we can say class here, and then we can apply any sort of class that we may want to add to the specific component. And again, Tailwind merge will be used here to resolve any conflicting classes that you may define. So let's just remove this UI property for right now, and we'll do this. And say, for example, again, we want it to maybe say rounded, we'll do maybe 2XL, and then we'll change the we'll do the font weight to font extra bold like this. So if we save that, then here inside of the browser, you can see those changes. Now you may be asking yourself, which one of these options should you choose if you do want to make a one-off change to one of your components? Now, the Nuxt UI documentation does specify that you can use both the UI prop and the class to make such changes. However, it doesn't really specify if you should use one over the other. Now, I definitely think that the UI prop is the way to go when making these one-off changes to your components. However, I can see a case and argument for, using either one, and there really isn't a wrong way to do it. I think it's more about a personal preference. However, I definitely think the UI prop is going to be needed for when you want to make these overriding changes to a specific property. In the example here, where we wanted to do a kind of reset on the base property for this button. Okay, so now that we learned how to make some one-off changes to our components, let's go ahead and look and see how we can make some global changes. So the first thing we want to do is create a new file here inside of the root of our project, and we're going to call this app.config.ts, and then I'm just going to paste within here this export default of define app config, and then we have our UI property, which is going to be set to an object. So the first thing that we're going to look at is how to go ahead and change colors. So as you're probably aware, this module uses Tailwind CSS under the hood, so we can use any of the Tailwind CSS colors, or we can create our own. So you can use any of the colors that Tailwind offers right here. So what we want to do is, for example, the default color right now is this green from the Tailwind color. Okay, I think that's right down here. So if we wanted to change this to something else as our primary, we can do that. So let's head back over to our app.config, and we're going to define our primary, and maybe we want our primary to be, let's just say, orange. Okay, so now if we save that and we head over to our application, I believe we might have to do a refresh, or we might have to restart our application now that we added that config file. And there we go. So you do need to restart your development server once you do create that app.config file. But as you can see, our button is now orange because we did set the primary color here to orange, and we have our button set to the primary color, which if you don't set this, it'll be set to this by default. Now, if you do want to define a custom color, you're going to want to ensure that you define all shades from 50 to 950, as most of them are actually used in the component's configuration. So to generate this really easily, they provide us a website to do this, so we can open this up in a new tab, and then we can just use this default color here. So what we can do is we can click export, and then we want to copy this code. Then within the Tailwind config, we want to come within our theme property. Then we have this extend property, and then we want to create a property called colors, and we can just paste in that color that we just copied from that website. And here inside of our app.config, we want to create a colors property, which is going to be an array, and then it takes in a string of the custom colors that we want to create. So the one we're going to be using is called Jade like this. So if we save that, and we could set the primary color to be Jade, but we can also use this directly as a color now within our actual component itself for the color property. So if we say Jade like this, and we save it, and we head back over to our application, and I did have to restart my development server for this change to take effect, but as you can see now, our button is now using our custom color that we define within our Tailwind configuration. Now, to go ahead and make global changes to a component or components, you do that here inside of the app.config, and it's going to be very similar to how we made our one-off change within our actual button component here in our index.view. So first off, what we want to do is target the component that we want to make global changes to. So in our example, we're using the button component, so we want to target the button. And within here, maybe we want to make changes to the border radius and also the font weight for all of our buttons. So what we can do is we can target the rounded property, and then what we can say is we'll do rounded full like this. And then I believe the second property was the font. And this property controls the font weight. So what we'll do for this is we'll say font extra bold like this. So now if we save this, all of our buttons are going to have border radius of rounded full, and they're going to have the font weight of extra bold. And as you can see, now our button is going to have that global change. It is worth mentioning though, if we do add some one-off changes to our button, then those global changes that we define will be overwritten. So say for example, we want to put the border radius to something like rounded large like this. Then if we head back, then as you can see, our global change is now going to be overwritten by our one-off change that we made for that specific component. Now, when it comes to making global changes here inside of wrap.config, if you do want to override those base styles, you can still do so by providing the strategy property and setting this value to override. And it's going to do the same exact thing as we've seen earlier when we made the change in our one-off component, where instead of using tailwind merge and resolving conflict, it's actually going to override that whole entire property. Now, some components, as with the button component that we've been using here throughout the video, come with some default options. And here inside of wrap.config, we can actually configure the defaults for whatever component that we want. So for this button component that we've been using, what we want to do is inside of the button property, we want to define the default property, and this is going to take an object, and we can define all the default properties that we want to set for this button component. So for example, we can update the default size. So by default, this is set to small. So for example, now we can change this to have a default of extra large, and also the variant, which has a default of solid, we can change this to outline. And if we save this, and here inside of our index.view, we're going to want to remove this size and also this variant. And if we save this and we head over to look at our application now, you can see that by default, the button's going to be the same size since we had it initially set to be extra large. But as you can see, we have the variant is now set to outline by default. Alright, so another really cool thing about Nuxt UI is that all the components are actually styled with dark mode in mind. And with the Tailwind CSS dark mode class strategy and the Nuxt color module, there isn't any setup that we have to do, which is great. Now by default, how this works is it goes off your system preference, which if you may have noticed throughout the video, we're currently here in dark mode because my system preference is set to dark, and we can see this inside the application if we go to inspect, and then as you can see here on our HTML element, we have this class of dark, which is thanks to the Tailwind dark mode class strategy. Now, if you want to disable dark mode inside of your application, you just want to come within your Nuxt config, and then within here you want to define the color mode property, and then within here we want to define the preference property, and we want to set this equal to a string with the value of light. Now, once we save this and we head back over to our application, we should no longer be in dark mode. However, sometimes what actually happens is it's going to cache that value inside of local storage. So if you come back to your application and you're still stuck in dark mode, you just want to remove that Nuxt color mode module entry from local storage. So here inside of our console, we can say local storage, and we can do remove item. And as you can see, we have one for the Nuxt color mode, and we can click enter. And then once we refresh it, we should now be in light mode because it removed that entry from local storage. Now, if you do want to give your users the option to go between dark and light mode within your application, you can easily build a color mode button, and the Nuxt documentation has a really good reference here on how to go ahead and do that. Okay, so the final thing that we're going to be covering here in this video is icons. So as I talked about a few times throughout this video, Nuxt UI actually uses Iconify, which gives us access to over 100,000 different icons, and Iconify is by far my favorite icon framework. I've made a couple of videos on it, and I nearly use it in every single one of my projects when I need icons. Okay, so here on Iconify, we're on the default set that gets installed with Nuxt UI, which is called Hero Icons. So let's just go ahead and grab a random icon. We can just grab this one right here, and we can just copy the name. I will be showing you how to install different sets as well using Nuxt UI in just a little bit. So anyways, if we head back over to our application, here inside of our index.view, how we can actually use an icon by itself is we want to go ahead and prefix by saying u, and then we just say icon. So pretty simple. And then this accepts a name prop, so let's just do a self-closing tag here. And then what we want to do is pass it that name that we just copied. So what we want to do is very similar to how we did with our loading icon. We need to prefix this with the letter I, and then we do dash, and then we have the set name followed by another dash with the icon name. And that's all you have to do. You can click on save, and then if we head back over to the browser and view our application, we should now see that we have our icon here. Now, one thing I do want to point out about this icon component is that you don't actually have the ability, from what I can see, to change the width and height of this icon. And if you're familiar with something like Nuxt icon, you know that you can easily go ahead and change the width and height for a specific icon. But like I said, it seems like we're limited to the default size that the Nuxt UI team provides us. So I would definitely like to see the ability to go ahead and change the width and height while using this icon component. Now, by default, the only icon set that you can use with Nuxt UI is the set called Hero Icons, but you do have the ability to install any set you want, or you can use all of them if you so choose. So if you do want to use every set and icon that Iconify has to offer while using Nuxt UI, first off what you want to do is inside of your terminal you want to say npm, and then you'll say I for install, and then we're going to say add Iconify JSON. And this is going to install every icon set that Iconify has. Then within the Nuxt config, we want to define a UI property, and then we want to define the icons property, and then we want to set this equal to a string with the value of all, and now you have access to use every single icon from Iconify while using Nuxt UI. Now, if you only want to use a couple sets that Iconify has to offer, not all of them, the process is pretty similar. So again, what we want to do is we're going to say npm, and then we'll do I, but this time we're going to say at Iconify-JSON, and then we want to do a slash, and then after this, you want to provide the set or collection name that we want to use. And here on Iconify, you can browse all the different icon sets that are available. So let's just select on Carbon here, for example, and then we can just select on one of these, and we want to grab the name of the icon set. So we'll grab this, which is Carbon, and then back inside of our terminal, we just want to paste this in, and then we want to hit enter, and that's going to install only that specific set. And then for the icons property, instead of it being equal to a string with the value of all, it's going to now be an array, and then we want to pass in the icon sets that we're going to be using, which in this case is just going to be Carbon. And now that we have this set, we can use any one of the icons from the Carbon library. And let's say, for example, we want to set a new loading icon using our new set of Carbon by default for all of our buttons. So let's just use this icon we have here. And within our default property for our button component, we want to define the loading icon property, and then we can paste this in. However, we still need to modify this a bit. So we want to say I dash, and then we want to add another dash after the set for the actual icon name. And if we save this and head back over to our index.view and we remove this loading icon that we added here for this component itself, and then we'll just want to update this loading ref to true so we can actually see the loading state. So if we save that, and then back here within our application, you can see that we have our new loading icon that we set by default within our app.config. Alright, so that's going to wrap it up for this introduction to Nuxt UI. Now I know we didn't cover everything, but we nearly went over all of the core features, and you should now be in a great place to start using Nuxt UI within your applications. Personally, I think the Nuxt Lab team did a really good job on this, and they seem to keep putting out new updates and features, which is really great to see. But definitely let me know down below what your thoughts are on Nuxt UI. And if you are interested in learning more about Nuxt, I am working on a Nuxt 3 course, which will be out soon. So if you want to sign up for the waitlist, you're going to head over to learnnuxt.dev. But anyways, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy it and you want to see more Nuxt content, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.